we have a prime minister who has significant financial interests tied to Brookfield, worth millions, and we have Brookfield, in turn, being deeply intertwined with a communist regime based in Beijing. On a broad level, shouldn't that concern Canadians?
Canadians should be aware of that, definitely.
The Ethics Committee has been relentless in its examination of Mark Carney's conflicts of interest. This week showed no signs of letting up as they asked the expert on Chinese interference as it relates to Canada's politicians, Sam Cooper. And let me tell you, the Liberals were not happy to see him. Let's take a look.
Your reporting notes that Brookfield maintained over $3 billion in politically sensitive investments connected to China and its state-linked real estate and energy companies. Can you explain how Prime Minister Carney's role in Brookfield's ties to the regime in China?
Sure, I'll go off memory of my own reporting. Thinking of that story, which I wrote in the lead up to the federal election, I researched into Brookfield's investments in China, and on the real estate file, I noted that after 2015, Brookfield had made very substantial China-based real estate investments, and due to my knowledge of Beijing's United Front networks, I noted that one of the key Hong Kong investors connected to the projects in which Brookfield was investing was part of China's political consultative conference. That was important to me because the Central Intelligence Agency notes that people on that high-level Chinese communist entity are involved, the CIA says, in Beijing's sort of global United Front networks. That's how the Chinese Communist Party brings influential people together. So I noted in my reporting that for Brookfield to get access to that same type of investment project on a major real estate deal in China, together with a very elite Hong Kong real estate tycoon, certainly in my learned opinion, would take a special kind of access to get that kind of deal. So then tracking forward through when Prime Minister Carney joins Brookfield, in the surrounding years, I noted that the real estate market in China had plummeted. At some point, Brookfield needed to secure some, let's call it sort of a re-injection of capital, and it turned out that it emerged that the Bank of China, as others have reported, was involved in bridging some capital to reinfuse that deal in China's troubled real estate market. So stepping back from that, I noted that people in Mr. Carney's position in Brookfield, Mr. Carney also traveling to China to meet with senior Communist Party officials around the timing of the Bank of China, assisting Brookfield with their real estate investment. That would certainly, in my mind, raise, the questions around access and influence.
Bang, we are off to the races. So, to sum up what Cooper is saying here, and if you haven't read Mr. Cooper's reporting, we highly recommend you go and subscribe to his reporting. He does it on his own. He's not part of he's not part of the mainstream media like he used to be at Global News. He runs the Bureau, and you can find a link to that in the description of the video. But what he's saying is Brookfield managed to heavily invest in real estate in China, billions of dollars worth, and then that was before Mark Carney came around. Now remember, there's a lot of misinformation going on in the internet right now about Mark Carney and Brookfield. One of the main ones is it talks about activities that Brookfield took prior to Mark Carney even being a part of Brookfield. So those need to be treated as two separate, independent things. Mark Carney only joined Brookfield in 2020. A lot of the misinformation talks about things that happened with Jared Kushner and Donald Trump and all this prior to him even being a part of Brookfield in the first place, but they just say Brookfield equals Carney. Not the case. So we have to be factual about this stuff if we're going to, call it out with any sort of credibility. So Sam rightly calls out these investments were made in China prior to Mark Carney's arrival. And then he talks about the fact that China's real estate market tanked and Brookfield said, we need some cash. Who did they go to? Well, they went to the Bank of China. Who did that? That was after Mark Carney arrived. So Mark Carney did that. How much did they secure? About $250 million. And what happened right after? Well, for those that know, Mark Carney then decided he was going to leave Brookfield and then run for this thing called the Liberal Party of Canada. Months, like not years, like barely a month apart. That's what happened. And not only 2 months prior to him going to China to secure this $250 million loan, he was named the Liberal Party of Canada's financial consultant. Kind of odd, don't you think?
Mr. Carney was the chair at Brookfield during that time. Then he enters public office. You talk about his ties, relationships with the regime in China. Is there any evidence to suggest that those ties have been maintained since he's entered elected office?
Well, in my research focusing on Brookfield, which is the nature already in previous testimony, I heard Brookfield and Mr. Carney's 103 potential investment vulnerabilities come up. Look, my work is based on open source investigations, and Mr. Carney, I noted in the timeline back to his days with the Bank of England, had worked on establishing a special relationship between the Bank of England and the Bank of China, and which is, of course, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party in terms of global monetary systems. So I felt that was important as a researcher. Through the years, Mr. Carney, when he joins Brookfield, prior to entering politics, repeatedly travels to Beijing and meets with senior officials, including President Xi Jinping. And I noted that for business persons at that time of Mr. Carney's stature to appear with Xi Jinping, again, as China's economy is in need of foreign investment, and while investments into China are becoming more dangerous in the view of some Western capitalists, having Mr. Carney be in those meetings, I do think is important. And you could say fairly is beneficial to Xi Jinping, as it would be beneficial to Mark Carney, the business person, in his time at Brookfield. So when we enter Mr. Carney's race to become the Liberal nominee for prime minister, I did note that as the Globe and Mail broke the story that Mr. Carney met with an entity called the Jiangsu Chamber of Commerce in Toronto, I was very aware already that Commerce Department had overt ties to the United Front Work Department, and indeed politically connected Canadians are honorary chairs with that entity. So I do think there's much reporting that hasn't come out on exactly what the Jiangsu Chamber of Commerce is and what Mr. Carney's meeting, which he denied at first, as you know, he denied elements of the Globe and Mail's reporting. So there's controversy around what really happened in that meeting.
Now, we covered that story actually when it broke. And just to make sure everybody is aware, when you hear Sam Cooper say United Front Work Department, that sounds like just some sort of union organization, and that's kind of the intent behind the name. But whenever you hear United Front Work Department, kind of associate that with CIA, like the Chinese version of the CIA. It's an organization that is controlled by the Chinese government, and their job is to influence throughout the world, almost by any means necessary. So they are constantly interfering with things, and these are the people that are responsible for the Chinese police stations. These are the people that are responsible for setting up shop and running these underground casinos that are around the world to try to sucker people in and trap them. Like they coordinate with people to do that, and that gets them influence, and that is then reported back to headquarters back in China, and it allows China to pull the strings, as it were, all over the world. So that is what United Front Work Department means. So whenever Sam Cooper says that, your ears should perk up, because that means something really important is going on. So when he says Mark Carney met with the Jiangsu organization, and that is connected via the United Front Work Department, that should be raising alarm bells for everybody. And it did, which is why the story broke when it did. And that's why Mark Carney was trying to deny that he even met with them.
From one Mr. Cooper to another. Mr. Cooper, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cooper, I want to ask you some questions about Brookfield, given your investigative journalism on Brookfield. Brookfield has significant investments in Beijing state-linked enterprises, more than $3 billion of investments, correct?
Correct.
And during his tenure as chair of Brookfield, Mark Carney played a significant role in expanding Brookfield's footprint in the PRC, correct?
Recalling my research, his work into, I believe it was green power businesses with connections to China was an expansion, yes.
Was involved in the refinancing in 2019 in relation to Shanghai commercial real estate worth billions.
That investment continued into his time taking over an executive role with Brookfield, yes.
And would it be fair to characterize Brookfield's investments in the PRC as politically sensitive?
In my view, as an expert on China's United Front system, as I said before, the nature of that real estate investment and the other parties involved, I do believe it would very much touch on the Chinese Communist Party's control.
And so would it be accurate to say that the Beijing-based communist regime has a significant amount of leverage over Brookfield with respect to its investments, and that if Brookfield wants to make a return on its investments, it would be very much in Brookfield's interest to maintain a good relationship with the Beijing-based communist regime? I think that would be fair, wouldn't it?
At a basic level, I do think it's fair that international business persons, even of the type of Michael Bloomberg, have been recognized to take into consideration the Communist Party's wishes, yes.
Okay. Very, very important there. Why? Well, what Mr. Michael Cooper is suggesting is that because of the amount of capital that Brookfield has invested into China, China has the ability to exert some leverage over Brookfield because Brookfield wants to make money. Brookfield doesn't want to lose billions of dollars for its investors, right? So China says jump. Brookfield may say how high. How does this relate to Mark Carney? Well, Mark Carney has a bunch of stock options. Mark Carney has a very, very suspicious amount of relationships that he's developed over the course of the last 10 years with China. And we put a short out on this not too long ago, and it was in one of our recent videos, where during the election, Mark Carney says, we want to do more business with Asia, but only countries that share our values. China is not one of those countries that shares our values. And then in the last 2 weeks, we have Anita Anand sitting down and saying, we're trying to form a strategic partnership with China. What happened? And this comes back to Mr. Cooper's question. What did happen? What were these conversations? What was the scope of the conversation between Mark Carney and the officials in China literally a month before he announced he was running to be not only the Liberal Party leader, but the Prime Minister of Canada? And why did he change his story? We all think we know why. But what's the actual reason? And that is the question that needs to be answered here, and that's the question that's being called out.
We have a prime minister who has significant financial interests tied to Brookfield, worth millions, and we have Brookfield in turn being deeply intertwined with a communist regime based in Beijing. On a broad level, shouldn't that concern Canadians? Vis-a-vis the Prime Minister in fulfilling his duty to put Canada's interests first when his private financial interests in Brookfield are deep, which in turn is deeply intertwined with the PRC.
In fairness, I think business analysts would say it's almost impossible for international business persons to not be doing business with Chinese state entities in some ways. But I do think it's fair to say if a company has a very strong balance towards businesses in China, such as the real estate investment or the green investments I've talked about, Canadians should be aware of that, definitely.
And Mark Carney, as recently as October of 2024, while he was advising the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, as his economic advisor, went over to Beijing, met with, in secret meetings, among others, the deputy governor of Beijing's central bank, and 2 weeks later secures a $250 million loan from Brookfield. Not anyone can just do that, can they? Unless they have significant ties with the regime at the highest levels.
There's no question. I noted the timeline of that visit to China and the deal, securing funding from the Bank of China. It's not to say that there's a definite tie there, but the timing is interesting and I think relevant.
And I just want to ask you about Brookfield's real estate investments. You referenced an individual who is connected to the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which the CIA has identified as a United Front entity. That individual is Vincent Lo, correct?
That's correct.
And Vincent Lo served as Brookfield's primary real estate partner, or one of their primary partners in the region, right?
To my recollection, he was a key partner on that development.
And Lo would have played that role during the time that Carney was chair of Brookfield, involved in real estate in the PRC, right?
If the structure of the deal continues, which I believe so, that would be the case.
So they're laying out timeline, they're laying out activities, they're laying out things that the average Canadian doesn't know, because the average Canadian hasn't read it. I go back to the mainstream media spent a week and a half relentlessly on Pierre on the comments that he made about the RCMP. And they spent almost no time comparatively on these issues. Why? We all know why. But why? Canadians need to know this. Canadians need to know what the Prime Minister of this country is tied to. And then it starts to explain some of the decisions that suddenly happen.
Is the lack of transparency in the investments that Prime Minister Carney has, does that present a risk to the confidence that Canadians can have in our democratic institutions. Specifically, you look at things like the global transition funds that he set up when he was at Brookfield. Do we know what is bundled up in those investments? Of the investments that are included, who is benefiting from those investments that Brookfield made? Which foreign state or adversarial state owned enterprises or controlled enterprises, for example, and investments that are domiciled in offshore tax havens. Is that lack of transparency? Does it present a challenge in your view when Parliament, when the media, when members of the public are trying to have clarity and certainty around the interests that a public office holder has? We hear that we'll just leave this all in the hands of the ethics commissioner, but there's some opaqueness that the ethics commissioner isn't able to cut through as well, and certainly doesn't have a mandate to dig into in the level of detail that you have, the relationships that led to some of those investment decisions.
Thank you for the question. In my reporting, the nature of the many different investments that Brookfield has with Chinese state entities, there are some investments connecting to Middle Eastern entities. As you said, I reported on the nature of investment funds or vehicles run through lower transparency jurisdictions in the Caribbean. I think all of those do present fair questions for Canadians that follow these matters closely. And I agree with others in this hearing that have said, or the prior hearing with Mr. Wernick, that hope and trust on the part of Canadians, I don't think is a good policy, especially in light of the rising geopolitical risks that we recognize Canada is facing.
It's been proposed by some and discussed here at this committee that the term in the Act that requires that the public office holder divest of their controlled assets, that the definition that allows them to simply move them into a blind trust doesn't achieve what we now see with the fullness of time, what we need to have happen in order to maintain Canadians' confidence. Do you think that divesting by having the public office holder sell their assets and then have the funds managed and reinvested in trust would improve the confidence that Canadians have and add a level of add another safeguard so that Canadians know that the decisions that public office holders are taking, the cabinet, the prime minister are taking, are in the national interest and not in their personal interest or their own financial interest?
I absolutely think that that's a step that would give the average Canadian a greater level of confidence. It's my own personal opinion that very international business persons of the level of Prime Minister Carney or former Prime Minister Paul Martin, it's just the nature of global investment that you will be engaging with often foreign states or very wealthy people from foreign states. So I do believe what the member suggested is a good step.
So before we get back to the other Mr. Cooper, I don't agree with the fact that, you have to divest everything and then you give it to somebody and then it's reinvested. I don't agree with that. I agree with Duff Conacher. You want to be a public servant, then you can't have quote unquote investments. Because no matter what, you're going to be in a conflict of interest. No matter what. So what you need to be able to do is divest everything, including, potentially even your RSPs, throw them in a GIC, and then that just earns interest. Now you have literally no possible conflict of interest that is going to be making you money. None. Because even a blind trust, Duff Conacher actually said this well. He said, listen, no matter who you give this to, if you are investment savvy at all, you're going to know where these investments are going to be going. You're going to know. So let's get real. If you're going to be making policy decisions, any policy decisions are going to have an impact on your investments, no matter what they are. So I don't agree. I don't agree that they should be in a double blind trust or a blind trust. Like Carney has a blind trust right now. Great. Trustee, and he can't see his investments, but he already knows what's in there. Now, a double blind trust is you barely even know who the trustee even is, right? So, but it doesn't matter. So I don't agree with that. But I think Canadians can get an increased level of confidence significantly if every single policymaker, meaning people in the government, are required to take their money out of their investments and put them in standalone GICs or government bonds or stuff like that. That way, any decision they make is not going to be able to be questioned whether they're in a conflict of interest. And you can give them tax breaks and stuff like that to make that make sense, right? You can't require somebody to take all their money out of their RCMP or RSPs and then tax them to death on it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you can change the tax law to make that happen. Liberals don't want to do that. Well, that's not the type of people we want. That's the problem.
30 seconds.
Just to jump in, you referenced earlier that the Prime Minister had met with individuals affiliated with the United Front at the Jiangsu Chamber of Commerce in Markham. That wasn't the only time that Mark Carney met with United Front leaders during the Liberal leadership, was it? He also met with United Front leaders in Steveston, Richmond East, which was the epicenter of the disinformation campaign by Beijing against Kenny Chiu, correct?
Quick response, Mr. Cooper.
I recognized from open reporting from my colleague Bob Mackin in Vancouver that video evidence did show that United Front associated members were at that meeting with Mr. Carney.
Carney keeps popping up at these events where United Front people are at. These are not the individuals you want to be seen associated with. But here we have them, over and over and over again. Remember, China is a country that continuously harasses people who have escaped China, immigrated to Canada, and tried to build a better life here. And China is a country that continuously tries to interfere in our elections, that continuously harasses or threatens our members of parliament, continuously tries to set up police stations. And these are the people that Mark Carney says, well, let's go establish a strategic partnership with. Wake up, Canadians. Wake up. Now, the Liberals did not like that Sam Cooper was dropping all of these facts. So what did they do? Did they ask him questions to get a better understanding of Mark Carney and his conflicts of interest? No. They went after him.
Mr. Cooper, I understand you are involved in some lawsuits currently, and there's a record that you have spoken and told lies to other committees. How can, after knowing all that record, is there a belief that your information is credible?
Thank you for your question. I strongly disagree with your statement, and maybe you can expand on that if you would like.
Involved in any, or have you settled any lawsuits or involved in lawsuits currently based on your reportings?
Okay. So the Liberal comes out and says, you've been lying in other committees. How can we trust anything that you say? And haven't you been involved in lawsuits as a result of your reporting? Sam Cooper calmly, what lies? Liberal responds, I'm not going to talk about the lie, so I don't have anything to say on that, so I'm just going to move to the second part of my question. Haven't you been involved in any lawsuits? It's disgusting. Because they're employing the far left playbook of throw out the accusation and let the accusation do its work. They have nothing. Because otherwise they would say it right then and there. If you want to discredit it, you want to say he's lied, say what it is. You can do it. You're in committee. Parliamentary privilege covers it. Even if you repeat the lie, Sam can't sue you because you're covered by parliamentary privilege. Nothing. Anyway, Sam?
There are lawsuits in relation to reporting on election interference. I can't comment on legal matters in this forum.
Have you settled out of court on some of those issues in the past?
Records exist, and the member can search them if he wants. I'm not at liberty to discuss legal issues in this hearing.
Mr. Cooper, I'm asking you personally, have you settled out of court settlement because of the stuff that you have printed?
Mr. Chairman, I've presented my answer on these matters.
Very, very well handled by Sam, dealing with that. And because Sam wouldn't answer, the Liberal said, okay, well, I'll split my time with this other guy. And they went on to other things. But this is what happens. When the Liberals don't like hearing what you have to say, they try and defame you, smear you, embarrass you. That's what happens. But this is not Sam's first rodeo. He's been to committee many times. He's been around the block. He knows how it works, which means he also knows how to answer. So hopefully we eventually get some answers out of these committees, because Canadians need to know how far down this rabbit hole goes in terms of Mark Carney's conflicts of interest, and most importantly, his ties to China, and why we are cuddling up so close to them, not even 6 months after Mark Carney stood in front of a camera and said that China doesn't share our values, so we're not going to be dealing with them.